Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, starting Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis, the very last line on the Amud. Our Mishnah was discussing when you have challah, that you need to be mafresh from your Isa, and that Isa became Tamei on Yantif, on Pesach itself. What does one do? After all, he can't bake it, because baking on Yantif that is not Litzorich Yantif is going to be a malacha. He can't destroy it because you're not allowed to destroy kachim, truma, and challah as well on Yantif. And finally, he can't leave the dough because maybe it will rise and become leaven, become chametz, and be over by Yerod, by Yematzeh. So Rabbi Gamliel says, Rabbi Yeshua rather, in the Mishnah says that there is no problem because since this is not your Isa, be'etzem, your challah rather, your challah is not yours, it's really to be given to a kohen, whereby you will not be over Bal Yerei Bal Yematzeh, because it's not yours personally. And there's no kohen that was given to, so therefore he's not going to be over either. So there's no problem, just leave the dough as is. If it indeed becomes chametz, it becomes chametz. After Yantiv, you'll go ahead and burn it. Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah was choylek, and he said, no, that over here you have to go ahead and first bake it, and then be mafresh. Before you then korei shem challah, first bake it, and then be mafresh afterwards. Now, the Gemara explains, what is their machlekes? The Gemara explains that Rabbi Eliezer says, hoyel, since a person could go ahead and matir his neder from the hafroshas challah, so essentially that dough would really become his, it'll be tevel once again. And therefore it's his mammon, whereby if he leaves it to rise, it'll become oiver bayer bayematzei. Whereas Rabbi Yoshua says, no, we do not say hoyel, and therefore it's not his mammon, whereby you can go ahead and let it rise, you won't be oiver bayer bayematzei. The Gemara then said, according to the opinion that says hoyel, then we understand why when a person is oife miyantif lechol, so why it is that that person who bakes from Yantif to Chol, he will not be Chayiv Malchus, because Hoyel, since if guests were to come, he would then be able to provide that bread to guests. Therefore, he's not over any malacha by baking on the afternoon after he already ate his sudos on Yantif. We don't say he's then baking from Yantif to Chol. On the other hand, if you don't say Hoyel, so then indeed he is, yes, prohibited from baking on the afternoon. It'll be a problem from baking from Yantif to Chol, and therefore he'll get Malchus. The Gemara then said, according to this man, the Omar, who does not say Hoyel, so how was he going to explain baking from Yantif to Shabbos, when Yantif comes out to be on Erev Shabbos? So how can he bake on Yantif? He'll be baking from Yantif to Shabbos. If you say Hoyel, so it's very good. You can say maybe Orchim will come. I'll need to then provide that for the guests. So therefore I can bake on Yantif even after my finishing my sudos on Erev Yantif, on Yantif, on the afternoon. Still I can have time to bake because maybe Orchim will come. So therefore I can bake it and use it for my Shabbos the next day. But the other Mandamro, who does not say Hoyel, how does he allow you to bake from Yantif to Shabbos? To which he answers, there's no Isser Diaraisa. Midiaraisa, one can prepare, he can cook and bake from Yantif to Shabbos. Only Midrabanan, they were concerned if you were allowed to bake from Yantif to Shabbos, you might be allowed to then, you might go ahead and bake from Yantif to Chol, which is Osir. So therefore you said, the Chacham said you have to make an Eruv Tavshilin. So now the Gemara asks on this man, the Omer, who says you can cook and bake from Yantif to Shabbos, Eisvei, Lechem Haponim, we're on top of Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. Nechal letisho la'asar ulachadasar loy pochos loy yoser. When it comes to lechem haponim, these are the 12 showbreads that were put on the shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash. So these, it says, could be eaten. It will be either the 9th, the 10th, or the 11th. Why? Because they were baked. They're put on the shulchan, and then they were then kept there for the Shabbos, the subsequent Shabbos, whereby they were removed, eaten by the Kohanim, and then a new set of showbreads were placed in their place. So it says over here, again, lechem haponim nechal, it could be eaten letisha, the 9th day from its day of baking, the 10th day, the 11th day, not less, not more. I mean, those are the only times that would be then the days that it would be after the actual baking of the breads. Ketzad, the Mishnah or the Brisa explains this. Kidarkoi letisha. If it's the regular scenario where they bake it on Friday, so you include the day of baking, whereby then the 9th day will be on Shabbos. Nefa be'erev Shabbos, necha be'Shabbos letisha. It's baked on Friday, the erev Shabbos, whereby it'll be a whole week later, then it'll be the 9th day. Chal Yom Tif lehios be'erev Shabbos. If Yom Tif comes out to be on Friday, then Nechal l'Shabbos la'asara. Then you bake it the day before on Thursday, whereby it will be eaten 10 days later. It will be, including the day of the baking, it will be the 10th day on Shabbos. Shnei Yomim Toim Shel Rosh Hashanah, when there are 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, then on Erev Shabbos, which will be Thursday and Friday. So then it would have to be baked, the Lechem Aponim, on Wednesday, whereby Nechal l'Shabbos l'Chadasar, it can be eaten 11 days later. Again, you count the day of the baking, then the 11 days later on the Shabbos itself. Since the baking does not doiche, not Shabbos and Yom Tif, therefore it'll come out to be either 11 days or sometimes 10 days. So the Gemara says, if you're going to say that indeed we do go ahead and cook or bake on Yom Tif l'tzarech Shabbos, then it's a kasha. Amai lo dochi Yom Tif. Why is it not doiche? Why don't we allow you to bake the lechem haponim on Erev Shabbos when it is Yom Tif, or on Rosh Hashanah? Omarlei. He answers, not a kasha, because Shvus kroiva hitiru. Shvus rechoika lo hitiru. Shvus kroiva, where do they allow you to then go ahead and then doiche? That they did when it was for the Shabbos that is immediate, or for the day itself. The next day, but over here when it's going to be for Shabbos, that's going to be 9 days later, 10 days later, 11 days later, they were not doiche. So therefore, they didn't allow you to do that. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, do Omar Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Hasgan, doiches Yom Tiv ve'eno doiches Yom Tzom. He says that when Friday comes out to be a Yom Tiv, so you could, yes, bake on Friday. You don't have to bake on Thursday. You can bake on Friday that Yom Tif itself, for the Lechem Aponim, which will be then 9 days later. He just says if Friday comes out to be on Yom Kippur, then you cannot. But if it's a regular Yom Tif, you could. So Ma'ika L'Meimar, he clearly does say that Shvus is Rechaika, they were Hitiru as well. Answers the Gemara, in this itself, Gufa, they were arguing that Mar Savar Shvus Krovi Hitiru. Shvus Rechaika Lo Hitiru. The Tana Kamo holds they were only Matir a Shvus Kroiva, but they were not Matir Shvus Rechaika. Umar Savar Shvus Rechaika Nami Hitiru. Whereas Yirmiyahu says even a Shvus Rechaika they were Matir. So it's Gufa the Machlekes. Mosif Rab Mari, Marv Mori asked the following question. Again, on the Manda Omru says that you can go ahead and cook on Yom Tif for Shabbos, or bake on Yom Tif for Shabbos. So he asked from Shtei Alechem. Shtei Alechem was the carbon that was brought on Shavuos, 2 loaves of bread, together with carbon shlomim. And it states over here, Shtei Halechem Eina Nechalos. It was not eaten not less than 2 and not more than 3 days. In other words, it was not baked on Shavuos itself. Ketzad nefes erev yomtiv nechal yomtiv l'shnayim. If it was baked on erev Shavuos, then it would then be eaten on the 2nd day, the day of the baking, and on Shavuos itself. So therefore, there's 2 days. Chal Yom Tiv liyos achar haShabbos. If Yom Tiv came out, Shavuos came out to be after Shabbos on Sunday, necheles liyom Tiv l'shloisha. Then it would come out to be 3 days. Lefisha eina doiche lois haShabbos lois haYom Tiv, because then it would be baked on Friday, whereby you include Friday, then it would be Shabbos, and the third day itself would be Shavuos. V'amris, he asks, Sorchei Shabbos nasim b'yontif, that if indeed you can go ahead and cook and bake on Yontif for Shabbos, then Hashi the Shabbos b'yontif, Shari, Yontif mi boy. So then on Yontif itself, then certainly you'll be able to. So then why over here on Shavuos can you not bake the lechem aponim? Answers the Gemara Shani Hasam, it's not a kasha because there's different Doma Kro. There's a specific pasuk in regards to the permission of Eichel Nefesh. The pasuk reads like this. It says, I'll read you part of that pasuk that's quoted over here. Ach asher ye'ochel lekol nefesh hu levado ye'aseh lachem. However, that which is eaten for everybody, he himself will be then made for you, lachem. So here the Gemara makes a drasha that which permits you to have cooking and baking on Yontif for Eichel Nefesh, that's lachem for you. Says the drasha, Damar Kro, lachem for you when you cook and bake for yourselves on Yontif. Then it's permissible. V'lo legavoy, but not for gavoya, not for a carbon. And therefore, over here would not be permissible because you need the carbon shlomim to then permit the eating of the carbon of the lechem aponim to the kohanim. He says that the baking of the shtei alechem is indeed doiche, and you can go ahead and bake on Shavuos. Ma'ika lemeimar. Soverla, the answer. So what are you going to do with this drasha of lachem? Soverla kabashol. He explains like Abashol the word lachem. The omar lachem v'lo lenachrim. You can cook and bake on Yom Tov for yourselves, but not for nachrim. And therefore, that doesn't have the word lachem to exclude for gavoiha.